You're here for season 7 of the Whole Horse podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here for the Whole Horse podcast. We're in season 7, and it's just been such an amazing season so far. I'm so grateful for the guests that I've had so far and the ones that are upcoming, including my guests today. I'm so pleased to welcome Diana Waters to the podcast today. Welcome, Diana.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm very excited to have you here. So I would love, Diana, to start by just asking you if you can share a little bit about your journey with horses, your personal journey and professional journey as well, and how you've come to the awarenesses that you have now when it comes to horses.
Yeah, so I think like a lot of us, I feel like horses were in my blood. So I think I was less than 3 when I started nagging my mum to go riding, even though we didn't really have horses in the family. Although actually, once I started riding lessons, I discovered that my mum had always, she did a little bit as a teenager, but she wasn't really allowed to have horses. And so she actually sort of realized her dream through us kids as well. So she started having lessons. And so I think it was really in the blood. But yeah, I started a beautiful little riding school called Green Cottage, which still exists in the UK. And just had lessons on a little Shetland pony called Mischief, and
Yes.
he was really cute. I can still remember just the picture of his neck and his mane in front of me, and just feeling so amazing being on the horse. I got my first pony when I was 8, and he was for me and my mum and my 2 sisters. And I can remember my mum trying him out, and I can remember him galloping round and round the arena. She couldn't stop. She had the biggest smile on her face, and she said, "Yeah, this is the one." And I think now, like, people must have thought she was quite crazy at the time, but Jimbo ended up being just the most amazing pony for all of us. So we went on rides with a mixture of ponies, bikes, and we're borrowing some of the riding school ponies as well, especially when they needed a little bit of extra work or were struggling to behave on the school. We'd take them for long picnic rides. So we had a really lovely childhood of just playing with ponies, and just riding whatever we could ride, and spending our time at the stables helping, and just really beautiful. And then when I was a teenager, I started studying for my British Horse Society exams, and along the way started to kind of lose that childlike joy of riding. I still really loved it, but I found that there's a lot more pressure on the horses, and the way that things were done didn't really quite align with how I really felt about horses. They were not so much treated as beings in their own right, I think, but more as a vehicle to get through the exams, and it's very mechanical. And I saw quite a lot of force being used. And I decided to just continue with my qualifications because I wanted to be able to have given it a good go, and to maybe think about changing the system from the inside. But I got up to my British Horse Society AI qualification, and then I went on to take my stage 4. And after that, I decided I wanted to find a nicer way of doing things. And I'd kind of got to the stage, because everyone says, don't they, that everyone says, oh, I'm not like the others, and I ride softly, and I don't use lots of hand and all of this sort of stuff. And I just found that people would say that, and then I'd go and see them, and I wouldn't perceive what they were saying. And I ended up writing a letter to the British Horse Society, which was published, and I really appreciated that they took the time to publish that letter. But it was sort of, raising some of the issues that I'd experienced in training, with the sort of amount of force used and things like that. And there's a lady called Heather Moffat in the UK she used to write a lot of articles for the magazines back then. So I'd heard of her, and she actually contacted me after reading the letter and invited me to her yard to watch her ride. And I was just blown away. It was so beautiful. So her horses, she had a working pupil there at the time as well. And she and her working pupil rode the horses, and the horses were just like happy and joyful. And the riders were soft, and they just looked like completely at one with the horses. Just really beautiful, really graceful. And you could see the horses were enjoying it and loving it. And so then I was just completely sold. And I was just so excited to find that you can actually ride like that.
Mm-hmm.
I started to think maybe it's just a thing that people say, but you can't really do that. So when I actually met her face to face, and then I also watched her teach, and she teaches all sorts of people. So some people coming in with, with cobs and ponies and all sorts, coming in for lessons with her off the track thoroughbreds. And every single time, even within the first lesson, the changes that she brought about with, novice riders or riders from all backgrounds and all types of horses, the changes were just really profound. So I went to study with her. I got my enlightened equitation level 1 instructor qualification. And while I was there, I experienced something called school walk, which is like a really slow motion, really lofty, beautiful walk. That's it's been around. It's used in French classical dressage, but it's not very much talked about. And also it gets quite confused because there's also the counted walk and collected walk. And the definitions have got a bit mixed up in between different languages. So, but the school walk is a 4-beat walk. So it's not like the counted walk, which is diagonalized. And it looks like it's in slow motion. So when I've shared videos of school walk, people have thought the video is playing in slow motion, but it's just the most beautiful thing to experience. And you can only really experience it once you're in oneness with the horse. So it's very meditative, and it feels like your nervous systems are kind of directly connected. So it feels like you go through all of the lateral work and things like that without feeling like you apply an aid, just feeling like you feel it in your body and then the horse does it. And it just has so many amazing benefits to it. So I'd actually, funnily enough, sort of rewinding a little bit, because I had an Icelandic horse in the UK called Svala, who I bought with my life savings when I was 18. And I had wanted to improve his tolt. So the Icelandic horse has an extra gait and I'd sort of, just from riding him and feeling, I could feel that he was kind of plunging forward and had a bit too much momentum and wasn't balanced. And I kind of figured out that I wanted to strip things right back and just go step by step and sort of within the step feel the balance. So with him, I'd started, and I hadn't actually realized that this was a thing at the time, but
I was going to say,
yeah, I'd sort of figured this out and found a beautiful lightness doing this work. And then actually he went on that year to win the novice British Championship, which was quite funny because I didn't really compete him, but it was happening local to where I lived. And his tolt had improved so much. And that's the only thing I've ever won, because I literally don't compete. But it was, and I think I didn't particularly work on the tolt. I worked on the walk and just the profound effect that had. But yeah, when I went to Heather and I experienced a true school walk, and then I came back to Australia, where I live now, and started to try it out with other horses, and just found that it's kind of like, it's like on a continuum. So not every horse can do a full school walk to the extent that Sudi, Heather's horse, can do it. But I found with every horse, once I slowed down the walk and started to explore balance within the space between the footfalls, it just has such a profound effect. And it's just beautiful. So I became really passionate about walk, really took a deep dive into it. And I just, with my own horses, I mostly school in walk, and then we play in the other gaits. It's like you set up the balance and then you release into the other gaits, and it's already there. So you don't have to work in the trot or the canter or the tolt, because I have another Icelandic now. The work happens in the walk, but it doesn't feel like work. It feels just like really lovely. It feels like meditation, and it's just, the whole process feels beautiful. So whereas I think in the past I had a bit of I sort of learned a bit of that no pain, no gain type attitude. You've got to push them on, you've got to have strong legs, you've got to be fit, good core strength. And I was never like a super rider. I've got short legs. I've got very short arms. So my arms always look awkward no matter what height I hold them. And I'm not strong. And also, I don't like putting effort in.
I'm with you on that one.
And I think when I was training for my exams and we had to push from leg to hand, and you had to, get the horse going. And I had one instructor, she say, it's not a Sunday afternoon stroll. And yeah. So sort of realizing that it doesn't have to be like that. And actually the process itself is what is beautiful, not the end. Well, I mean, the end result's beautiful as well, but it can be beautiful right from the start, and it should be. And that's what I teach to all my students as well. And a lot of this stuff I do in hand as well. And there's a similar sort of feeling to the in hand, but my in hand is very low energy compared to a lot of what you see. So again, it's meditative, it's slow motion, and there's no tail swishing, like kind of elevated. It's just nice and calm and lovely, and just feels lovely. So it's kind of like just good for the person and good for the horse. And a lot of people don't really believe that you can get results from something that feels nice and easy.
That's such an interesting thing right there that you shared, because I think, yes, so often I think we're taught that it has to be hard and it has to be strenuous and striving for it to be worthwhile, right? It's like, I think so many of us as humans have this belief that we don't even necessarily realize that the more that I endure or my horse endures, the better the outcome is going to be, and the better, the more worth it and the more whatever, right? And this is really helpful to hone in on this. Like, I've been talking the last couple podcast episodes with various people about, can my training be boring? Am I good with that? Can it, and not necessarily boring, because that is what you've described to me sounds actually so spacious and lovely and creative, in its own right. So, boring, let's put that in quotation marks, because I don't think that that's what it is, but can it be slowed down to the point where we can actually engage with the spaces? I love that, in between the steps.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, just, okay, what's there in between the walk steps? And I also, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this as well. I remember when I was sort of starting into dressage and things, and it was like, I remember hearing that you could do pretty much anything and train everything at the walk.
Yes,
right.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So going back to your point about the boring, I get a lot of people. So I get two things. I get people saying, I just don't enjoy slow work, it's boring. And I get people saying my horse just doesn't enjoy slow work, they find it boring. And I think it's kind of to do with what mindset you're in, because a lot of people are quite, well, I mean, it's natural, all of us really are goal oriented to a certain extent, and we kind of miss out being fully in the moment because we're wanting to see something that's easy to see and easy to measure. And I think I'm always a bit baffled by the idea of it being boring, because I'm so immersed during the slow work that I can't really understand how you could feel bored, because you're so super focused, and the things that you notice and the cool things that happen. So some of this as well, I'm not very conventional in a lot of ways, and when there's a little problem, I won't necessarily address it right then, but when there's a little problem, it'll be in the back of my mind, and I'll think about one, soon I've got to explore this. So for example, my Icelandic Vikinga would sometimes be a little bit bitey in the in hand. Like sometimes he'd start sort of snapping, and I was thinking, what is this? And one day I just thought, he'd usually do it like a bit at the start and then he'd be okay. So easy enough to just push through it, right? And not worry about it.
Right. Yes.
And fine to do that as well, I think sometimes. But I just wanted to find out what it was. So I went in not with I'm going to cure this, but with more of I want to know what this is. And the first time I decided to explore it, I had such an interesting session. So part of the issue is that he is being Icelandic. He's puts on weight easily. He had very barely noticeable subclinical laminitis shortly after I first had him. And it's completely my fault because I was into the kind of, people say if you let them on long grass, it's short grass because it's not high in sugar. So, and he had lots of space and in a herd and everything. And he was putting on weight. And I started, making smaller areas for him. But he did get to a stage where he was just seemed a bit footsore. And so I then ended up taking him completely off the grass onto I had to create a track system. And I'm on a rental property. I'm like so super lucky to have my horses at home, and it's really rare in my area to be able to get a rental where you can have horses. So I'm so grateful to my landlord. But I had to, and I live on my own as well, so I had to set up a track system, which I did with star pickets and electric tape, get him completely off the grass, and then get some low sugar hay for him. So it took a little while to sort of before I was riding him again, but it's not a horse property that I live on. And so my arena is on the flattest part of the land, which is not that flat. It's a little bit of a slope. And again, it's marked out with star pickets and electric tape. Not electrified. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? To ride in an electrified arena. Yeah. And so poor Vikinga, he's not allowed grass. And then I ride him on a grass arena, right?
Right.
So I went through a whole process of trying to make things okay. And I figured out there's two parts to this. I need to make him feel okay about it, but also I need to make me feel okay about it. Because if I feel guilty and that it's not fair, then I can't set him clear boundaries. And then it'd be worse for him because he doesn't really know where he stands. And he'll always be like, can I have the grass? So I came up with like quite a complicated. So he has some loosened hay before I ride him. And then he has 5 minutes of grazing on the arena, and I've left a little bit of it unmowed. So there's a good bit of long grass for him to eat in the middle. So he gets 5 minutes, and then after that, it's bridle on. And while he does his 5 minutes, I walk around the arena and I practice the things so I can get the feeling of them in my body. So I do like the shoulder in and the shoulder into Ronver transition, which took me ages to get my body around. And I think it's interesting because you don't people will try it on their horse, but they haven't got it in their own body.
Oh, it's so true. I was just doing a lesson this morning working on half pass, and I was really just struggling with, I kept leaning way to one side, and my leg kept coming off and losing the orientation. I was like, wow, this is really interesting how it's taken my brain a little while to kind of catch up to what it actually needs to do here. So no, for sure. I think that's a really great thing to be doing.
Yeah, actually, it's so interesting because I have always struggled with travers, right? But I can do half pass and they're the same thing, right? And yeah, it's so interesting. It's to do with because for travers in my brain, it's like stopping the front end. Whereas with half pass, it's like opening into the front end. Even, just from there being a fence there or not. And so but it's just so powerful to walk through the exercises until it feels natural in your body, and it can take so long. And then it's not surprising that the horses get confused. And when I was at Heather's and her horses all know all the stuff, and Sudi would be like, you want travers, don't you? And I'm like, yes, I do. And Heather would be like, you've got it. I'm like, I haven't. I'm sorry. Sudi's just doing it because he knows he's figured it out, but I still haven't got it. I still can't my body. And I know if it was another horse, they wouldn't do it. Sudi's like, okay, let's figure this out. You're not quite being clear, but yeah. So while Viking is eating his grass, I'm walking through my things and also trying to work out some of the things. Like I'm trying to teach him PF, but I want to teach it in a way that's no whip tapping.
Yep.
Because I want to teach it from a balance and a release. And this is it's a bit silly in a way because I don't really know how to do PF. So I've done it a few times on some schoolmasters, but again, I've always felt like they're doing it because they know what to do, right?
Yes.
So, but anyway, so I've been practicing. I practiced a lot on myself and try to feel what it's like in my body. And we're getting we got some bouncy little half steps, which is really exciting. But so while I'm doing that, Vikinga's eating his grass, and then we get to the end. And then I go and put his bridle on, he gets a carrot. and he brings his head up. And then while I'm doing up his bridle, he gets like 100 carrots to make the transition easier. So all like broken into tiny bits. So do up the throat lash carrot, do up the curved chain carrot. So he doesn't have a brow band or a nose band. I remove various parts of the bridle for what things I've noticed with how it sits and how it feels for him. So once everything's done up and the mane's untucked, there's another carrot, and then off we go and we begin the work. And that's usually when he begins the sort of bitey thing. But the good thing is, the other thing I did was I taught him a game, wait and eat. So we walk on, we halt. As soon as he'll start to pull at the grass, as soon as he stops pulling for a fraction, I release the rein and just say eat. And then 8 mouthfuls, walk on, halt, wait, eat. And he's learned all the commands. So he plays the game, he likes the game. But it's also taught him that an eat comes after a soften. It doesn't come after a pull.
Mm-hmm. A pull.
So then if I need to correct, and occasionally he will still pull because he's very, very food driven, and he's got that kind of big personality of, like, he doesn't mind pushing through a bit of pain. Like I'm holding with I'm holding him there. I don't like to hold him when he's wearing the bit. I really hate it. But occasionally it's happened that he's pulled with the bridle and I've just held on the bit, and he'll happily push through that pain if he really wants the grass. But
yeah.
Most of the time he remembers
to
wait. He'll get the grass easier that way. But anyway, so we've got to a stage now where we can, once we've gone through that difficult transition from grass time to not grass time, he can get immersed in the in-hand, and then he starts to enjoy it. But it's that time at the start when he's a little bit bitey. And I wanted to see if there was anything else I could do, because I do suspect a part of it is definitely the grass, and he would just rather eat grass, and he doesn't know why I'm not listening, because I always listen to him. He's like, why don't you get this? I just want to eat grass. What is wrong with you? Why don't you get this? I'm trying to tell you. So there's that tricky bit in the transition. But once we've gone, he's not thinking about it anymore. And I can ride a long rein or whatever, and he won't think about the grass, which is lovely.
Well, I wanted to ask as well, because you shared a video with me initially when you first reached out, and I found it really fascinating and thought-provoking. And I would definitely love to get into this. And I know the little, tiny segue in terms of like biting behavior, but very different, I know.
Yes.
And this horse Forrest that you worked with, I think his story is really important and helpful for a lot of us. So can you share a little bit about that story, about what was happening for the two of you, how you kind of, work together? Because the video was of essentially Diana having a session on the ground session with Forrest and what was coming up there. So can you share a little bit more about to give people a perspective of that?
Yeah. So I shared that video. I haven't really talked about it much because it was a sad story and it had a sad ending. But I'd love to talk about it because I think it's really important. So Forrest came to me. It's very strange how he came to me, because I'm not somebody who takes it lightly taking on an animal. Like the first animals I had were chickens, and it took me like 6 months before I was sure that I knew everything I needed to know to look after chickens properly, right? So with Forrest, it's a really strange situation because his picture came up on Facebook and he was at a rescue centre, and my friend messaged me and said, this horse looks really lovely. And I messaged her back saying I don't need another horse, because I had Vikinger and Flicker, and that was a good number for me. But my friend seemed to be really insistent, and he was pretty, and I said, almost just to shut her up, I just said, okay, well, I'll apply. But there was loads of interest. So I thought, I didn't put that much effort in. I thought, I'll put in an application. I won't get chosen. That will kind of keep my friend quiet, get her off my back. But my application got accepted. And so I decided it was meant to be. So Forrest came to me. And when he first came, he was very frightened. It took me half an hour to get his halter off because he didn't want me to go near his face. He was really frightened. And I let him have a couple of months in the herd where I would just, he's fed twice. They're all fed twice a day. He comes in. I never pushed him or pressured him. I started to sort of interact with him, got to the stage where he would accept and put his nose in the halter. And I didn't use any food treats because I really wanted to make sure he was okay and not pushing through his fear. So we got to a stage where I could halter him. But I'd realized by this stage that there was probably something not quite right, because he didn't behave normally with the other horses either.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, when they went to mutual groom, he would go as if to groom them, and then he'd sort of bite them really hard, and then they'd be like, "Oh, what are you doing?" and move away. And then it was like he wanted to be touched, but he didn't want to be touched.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to a stage, and one thing that I regretted, and I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of learning in this for people that are listening. One thing I was regretted, I think, when I first got him, I should have had him sedated and got the teeth done, the feet done, the worming, a good proper check, everything. Because what had happened now was that I built some trust, and I didn't want to break that trust by having the vet come and do all of those difficult things. But I knew that there could be pain from teeth or whatever that was causing the problems. So I wanted to get him okay to have his feet trimmed, and I wanted to get him okay for the vet. In the end, I ended up having him sedated for the teeth and the vet, and he was so scared that even under full sedation, he was kicking out and panicking and rearing. It was really awful. But we got the teeth done and the feet done, and then after that, I wanted to get him to be okay with having his feet trimmed. And to me, it was sort of, I didn't ever need him to be ridden or anything like that. I just needed him to be okay for his basic care to happen without trauma. So at the time of the video, I was working on touch, and he hated touch. And I've been working on it for a long time, and I wanted him to feel okay with being touched just as much as I needed to touch him. And I wanted to know what was happening for him as well. And I actually experienced I've had some sessions where I had a real emotional reaction to touching him myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to feel like maybe I wasn't the right person for him, because his trauma kind of seemed to trigger mine.
Right.
And it was very confusing as to, I felt a lot of, am I doing the right thing? Having him, would he be better with somebody else? Am I making it worse?
Mm-hmm.
But in that particular video, it captured, I discovered that I just learned such a lot about touch and consent working with Forrest. And I discovered that if I can generate a loving feeling and put my hands on my heart and present that, so it almost feels like I'm holding that love in my heart, and present that onto his neck, he will accept the touch. Mm-hmm. So I was doing that with him, and I was wanting to be able to touch his neck and his legs, because what would happen if I went to touch his legs, sometimes he'd swing around and bite me, and I wanted to stay safe. So I wanted to be able to put one hand on his face or his neck and one hand on his leg, and he would be okay with that. And he would tolerate it, but then he'd be like, sometimes he'd go into biting. But then what we do is we do like one round, I'd touch my heart, touch his neck, and then come back to myself. And then he would put his face up and put his nose again, feel my breath afterwards. And it felt like he was kind of almost feeling for the life and feeling for the connection when he did that. So we go through a little, to my heart, I'd touch him, and then he put his nose up, and then we'd start again. And I started to find that he started to seek. It's really interesting, that particular session, he started to sniff my legs. So I'd been touching his legs. And then in the break, when I gave him time to process, he would then put his face down and run his face down my legs. It was so interesting because it's just really interesting as to what was going on there. Like, was it because I was touching his legs and he was trying to touch my legs to sort of figure out what was going on? So that was just really, really interesting. And the other thing that happened was that when I stood and brought myself and generated that feeling again, at one stage, he sidled up to me and he sort of leaned against me. Mm-hmm. So he was seeking the touch and seeking the contact. But then when I gave the touch, he would tolerate it, but he wouldn't enjoy it. And I think it physically hurt him to be touched, but he wanted the connection. He wanted the touch because he's a living being and a social animal. He needed touch. And the same when he was grooming the other horses, he needed that touch, but that touch physically hurt him. And then so I got him to, on some days I was able to trim his feet.
Yeah.
And then we go backwards. And then one day, on another day, it was like, he's like an unhandled horse again. He couldn't remember anything or tolerate anything. And I'd have to go right back to the start and spend another month reteaching him from the start. And I tried clicker training him towards the end because I started to realize that nothing I was doing was working. And this is where I started to have to think about what was going to happen next, because I thought, I feel like I could have sent him off to a trainer and they could have probably round penned him and got him moving, got the movement in his body and got him to be okay with being ridden. Because, you see some horses that can't be touched, but they can be ridden and they seem to be sort of okay, right? And I was thinking I could send him someone and they could do more for him than what I have. Or possibly I could be the wrong person for him and he just needs someone who's a little bit more, less affected by things, right? And gives him the confidence. So I went through all of this, and you hear so many stories, right, about horses. This horse was about to be put down and I rescued him, This horse was destined to be put down because nobody could do anything with him and all this, and I rescued him and this is the happy ending. So when you're the person that's thinking, I think it might, I might have to put this horse down, then that's not like a hero story, right? I'm the person that actually did put the horse down. I'm not the person who rescued him and gave him a lovely life. So it's very confronting on that level. But I think what I'd realized is, yes, there isn't really a clear answer as to the right thing to do. So potentially he could have gone off with somebody else and had an amazing life, and they could have figured out what was wrong with him and everything could have been great. But conversely, he could have gone off and nothing had been fixed. And now he's with someone that also doesn't understand him. And so I was sort of going between the two possibilities for a little while and trying to think of anything else that could be done. And if he was okay to have his feet trimmed and everything, it would have been fine to, for him to just carry on being in the herd. But I was about to go to England for a month, and a few weeks before I was about to go, he started to wobble in his walk. And then one day he started rearing. He was just in his feeding yard and he was always very chilled out about being fed and everything. He started rearing, and I let him out of the gate, and he came up to me and he wanted to be close to me and on top of me, but he was rearing, not in an aggressive way, but like in a help me, save me sort of way. And I realized that he was getting worse and he had a pain face all the time, and the other horses weren't interacting with him. I felt like he was in pain all the time. And I also felt that he was dangerous, not through his own fault, but with me away and somebody else looking after him. And when he seemed to be getting worse, I just didn't think. I just decided it was time. So and he wasn't put down by a vet. He was he was put to sleep while he was eating a feed. So it was, he was happy at the time, and I just got I got a wave of grief, but then I got this really beautiful, peaceful feeling settling in me. And then I knew that it was the right thing to do for Forrest. I don't know whether there would have been, I still don't know whether it was the right thing in terms of maybe there would have been a way for him to be better. And it's really hard because I would have liked to have had a dissection for myself so that I knew, because I think he had ECVM, but just for myself, I would have liked to know, did I do the right thing, and also what was causing it so that I can know in the future. But it's kind of it's unanswered really, but I think I just did the best that I could do for him, and he taught me a lot, and I'm just really grateful for the time that I had with him. But I think that he came to me to end his life, and he was only 6. And that's what happened really. But it was sad, and it's sort of unresolved, but I still think it's important for people to sometimes hear about what it's not always a happy ending, and it's not always I saved this horse, and it's not always questions that can be answered. It's not always black and white, clear cut, and sometimes it's very, very hard.
And I really appreciate you sharing his story for a number of reasons. I think number one, this is one of those stories that we almost feel like, oh, I don't know if I want to share this story because it's like it's such a hard thing to do. And yet I have myself supported clients with putting down horses that were 8, 10, 12 years old because of similar things, pain, chronicity of health issues, and it can be so hard because, like you said, we get to this place of questioning ourselves, like, would it be better if he went to a different place, or maybe someone can train these behaviors, or something can shift. And yes, potentially those things were true, but I think that the piece that really rings for me is he was being very clear with you about what he needed and wanted, and he also needed someone who would be courageous enough and intuitive enough to connect with him and also be willing to make that choice for him, right? Because I think
Yeah.
for a lot of people, they may not have been able to, right? Give with his age and things that would have been, and with a horse like that, I often think too, if we did pass him down the line, one of my big questions to myself is always, what are the potential outcomes of that change of hands, right? Because I know here in Canada, one of the things I see often, and I guess I'm on a controversial side of this slightly, but I see a lot of 25, 26, 27-year-old horses being rehomed to as companions or even riding horses.
Yeah.
And I think I'm one of those people that, for me, my mare Diva is 25 now. We've been together 20 years. If the decision had to be made to either rehome her or make a different choice at this point, even though she's absolutely full of life, if I couldn't, continue to pay for her way and on all of those things, I honestly would consider euthanasia,
Yeah.
because as she, ages, she's going to have different needs. I can't predict whose hands she's going to end up in, unless it was like, okay, she's going to this friend and I totally trust them and I'm, like it's all good. But, I know that even my listeners right now be like, oh my God, I can't believe you would do that. And for me, it's the weighing out of, okay, well, what is the best possible option? So for Forrest, when I feel into his journey, like as an animal communicator, this is what he needed. This was his path. And this
Yeah.
was your path together, right? There was a reason, like you said, that he chose you. And this is, as hard as it was for you, the decision that feels like the right one for him, especially if he started to show neurological signs and these pain signs, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
I think, I mean, the other really hard thing, and I often wonder this as animal communicators as well, is that the problem is, I think really animals don't want to die, right? So
No.
Forrest wouldn't have wanted to die, but it's like, it's hard to explain what I'm trying to say. It was the best thing for him, and when it happened, that's what put him at peace. And that was what he needed, and he kind of did know that in a way, but that instinct to live is so strong that we
Oh,
can't quite get that. We can't quite be
yep.
sure, you know?
Well, I often say that there's the two sides. So when you're looking at something like euthanasia, it's remembering there's well, more than two sides, but two main sides. So one being the physical, and that part of a horse is so determined to live,
Yeah,
so determined to survive, such a warrior, right? um and then there's the other side, which is the higher, what we might consider higher self, spiritual, soul level stuff, right?
yeah,
And we're working with both of those things in a passing or in a navigation of, is this the right thing? Is acknowledging that even with a horse whose soul is like, it's my time, we may have a distinct struggle in terms of euthanasia, because just like us, the body strives to live, right? It wants to stick around, of course. This is our instinctual nature. So yeah, that can be something very hard to grapple with, especially when we want it, ideally to be just so easeful and peaceful and, like, yeah, we have this vision of it just going so smoothly. That's not necessarily how it goes, unfortunately, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a good way of explaining it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
for
appreciate
sure.
that.
Hmm.
Yeah. And the way that I think the actual process, because he was shot, the process itself was not, I think it would have been terrible if we'd had the vet and the needle and he would have been traumatized and frightened.
Yep.
But because it was so instant, even though it's not nice for the human to see that, I think, the process itself, there wasn't a fight and there wasn't that body trying to struggle to stay
Yep.
alive. It was just over in an instant, and then that feeling of peace. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
but it is, and especially when everything you do is, or you try to, I mean, I try to do everything consent based. Obviously, not everything is, like wormers who would consent to a wormer, right? But
Totally.
but whenever possible, I try and do everything consent based. And for such a thing as big as that, to do that without seeking consent in a normal way is quite confronting thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I know that's why a lot of people end up reaching out to myself or, animal communicators prior to this, because it's just that sense. Playing God absolutely sucks. That sense of taking a life is, and we should feel totally weird about that. I think
Yeah, definitely.
if you don't, then that's a question in itself.
Yeah,
Because it's
definitely. And
a big deal, right?
yeah. And you
Yeah.
saying that, playing God, that's exactly what it is. Because I felt like, why do I have the right to be the person that decides? What gives me the right?
Yes.
It's a weird sort of thing, isn't it?
It's absolutely so weird. And yeah, and if we don't feel like it's weird, then that's, like I say, something to sit with and just be like, okay, what's that about? Yeah, and I think it's why we look for resources outside of us to give us a sense, like, am I on the right track here? Like, is this something that, like, I'm feeling this? Is this the thing that, is this what's also resonating for you, with having other people giving feedback? And I know that can be very, very challenging, but from what it sounds like, this was the shift that was needed, as very, very hard as it was. So
Yeah, and I
yeah.
think the rearing incident was, and the timing of it all, I think that
Yeah.
was all as well, because I needed that extra push,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
You
needed
needed
it
that
to be,
confirmation, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's what will often happen is, I see this even with aging horses, is they'll do peaks and valleys, right? So when we're in like an aging process, or even into the dying process, we'll see that often with most animals, where they do, okay, they're looking pretty good today, and then it's like, ooh, this is not a good day. They're having lots of symptoms, and then up and down. And
yeah,
so that sense of having that confirmation, oh yeah, this is not good quality of life. Like, he's getting wobbly on his front legs. He's starting to, panic literally in his system about what he's feeling. It sounds like that to me kind of speaks to like neurological
yeah,
nerve firing stuff. So yeah, very, very uncomfortable. I mean, as an osteo, I see it in my office, and that's the worst. Like, people report, I had a gal in the other day who's having neuropathy in one of her arms, and she's like, this is worse than childbirth. This is worse than, she was like, trying to explain it to other people, because it's not like she can go and show someone a wound on her arm and say, look, because it's so, yeah, it's an experience that she's having, that she's trying to explain to others. So then we extrapolate that back into horses, and it's like they can't even say like,
that's why I hate it so much when people say he's been given the all clear by the vet and there's no pain.
yeah, we've
I,
ruled out
I just
pain.
ruled out pain.
What does
Because
that mean?
Yes, I hate that. I think that's I hope that vets don't actually ever say that. I hope
They
that because I just think it's so like they have a responsibility when someone's trusting them to be honest and say we can't rule out pain, you know. They could say
absolutely.
you know, I can't find anything, but if your horse is still showing you that there's a problem, and if there's any sort of behavior that's indicating a problem, whether it's pain or stress or whatever, you just can't rule it out. Like I've got a friend who has a pain issue and nobody knows what it is, and she goes to the doctor
Yeah.
and they're still investigating, but they can't find anything and done all the tests. If she was a horse, people would say, we've ruled out pain, she's just being lazy, you know? We
Yeah,
need to go on after her.
totally right.
But
Yeah.
horses they can't do that. And there are so many easy ways that we can see that they're in pain if we look, because they do show it in their faces and in their behavior. And I've seen pictures on Facebook of horses with a full pain face, and the person has said, you know, what's the problem with my horse? We've ruled out pain. So what's the training issue here? And you can see the pain in the horse's face.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that should not even be a phrase, we've ruled out pain. It should
I
be.
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with you there. I think that's it, it's an impossibility. And absolutely, if they're not able to report, say to someone, hey, this is what I'm experiencing, then it is up to us to really read the signs and really watch and pay attention to pain face, to grimace scale, to behavioral issues that are out of character. All those things are so critical to be paying attention to. I know I had an experience with my Raven, who, when you put the girth on, would scoot. Like as soon as she started moving, she'd scoot and do a little buck and just be like, "Woo!" and then be unsound almost immediately. And this had been kind of like, oh, that's just what she's like, and she just has this behavior. And then I started learning about nerve impingement and thoracic sling disorders and all of these things, and went, oh, okay, like this is not normal. She has pain, and she's showing it through these behaviors, and it's exacerbated with her girthing. And yeah, and then okay, let's break that down, because this horse should not be ridden until this is worked with and dealt with. And so it was really actually interesting, because yesterday morning, been really working with her in hand classical work, and she's finding her balance, and it's so cool, and she's freeing up in these amazing ways. And I went yesterday for the first time in probably 3 or 4 months, and just decided, okay, let's try. We'll put the bareback pad on and do the girth up seat, just see where she's at with things. Checked for nerve impingement beforehand, and she walked off just totally fine. And I went back and did a bit of lunging just to see, like, okay, what's her soundness, and totally sound both directions. And it felt like such a win. It was like, oh my gosh.
And I think
You,
the thing is that when you really are brave enough to actually say, I'm going to listen, even if it's not what I want to hear,
totally.
the rewards are so amazing, because then when the horse shows you their true self and expresses, and one day they are okay, you know that they are fully okay. And then
Yes,
that relationship is just so deepened from that. And it's like,
exactly. Yeah. It just felt like from that moment on, it was like, okay, we like things have just totally opened up. Where if I had continued to force her to have her girth on and just move through the pain and figure it out, that's disconnecting, because she's like, why are you doing this to me? I don't feel comfortable. It's fairly obvious that I don't feel comfortable, but I think it's so normalized, like cinchiness, and oh, my horse is just reactive to the girth, or whatever it is. And like we could take it back to that conversation earlier of looking for the spaces in between, is slowing things right down. It's like, okay, but that is giving us information about something that's important here, right?
yeah. And
That
I think the only way to kind of survive that, because it can be really frustrating, because really every horse has so many issues which we could
yeah,
unpeel. But I think like when you go in with a curious mind and you genuinely go into a session wanting to learn something about your horse, then it's very rich. The more they show you, the richer it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I don't go into every session like that, because sometimes he needs exercise or he's going to get laminitis.
Totally.
And when I'll say to him, and I always acknowledge him, and I'll say, "Yep, I hear you, but today we're just going to get on with it." You can't necessarily do it all the time, but every time you do it, it improves everything so much.
It really does. I would love to ask this last question before we complete, because I know I talk a lot about legacy when it comes to passings. And I would love for you to just share, is there anything that Forrest wants to share with horse people about his life and what he would like people to learn?
That's a tricky one. I think it would be for the owners. I think he would like to say whatever is right for you is right for you, and there's not a right or wrong answer, but you can listen to your heart and you can listen to your gut, and don't worry about what other people think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And it's been just a pleasure to have this conversation with you today, Diana.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love you to share how people get in touch with you.
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Responsive Equine Diana Waters, or is it Diana Waters Responsive Equine? I'm not sure, one of those two. I also have a website, thepowerofwalk.com, and that's where you can get free resources and things all to do with walk, and you can look at my case studies. And I have a course as well, which I'm running at the moment. There'll be another run of it in May, and that's all on the website as well.
Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. So if you want to expand your walk in very cool ways, head on over there. I hope you all enjoyed our conversation today. I know it went into some very different places, and maybe I needed to put a warning at the beginning about tissues, but I hope you all are feeling good now and learned a thing or two, and really appreciate you being here today. Thanks again, Diana.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Bye for now.